No one ever knew what was inside the box. I kept blood-stained names that weren't mine, but died with me. And now that my voice trembles, it needs to be heard, even if just one last time. My name is Eleanor Ruth Maddox. I'm 88 years old, and I spend my days in a quiet care home in rural Ohio, where the TV is never off and visitors always get the room number wrong. For decades, no one knew that under my bed lives a wooden box I've carried since the war, full of notes written by dying soldiers, whispered requests caught between delirium and hope. I never delivered a single one. The orders were clear. No unofficial communication. But my heart never followed orders. Now, with fragile hands and a chest full of voices no one else ever heard, I've decided to share what I kept hidden. Because this story, though silent, still beats. And maybe it'll finally find someone who listens with their heart. Come sit with me, sweetheart. Take a deep breath. This story's not easy to tell, and I've held it in far too long. My hands are shaky now, but my memory still knows the way. If you've got a little space in your heart to listen slowly, then hear me out. No need to rush, no need to judge. Just listen, and if something here touches you, please subscribe to the channel and walk with me to the end. Like this video if it found you at just the right time. And share it with someone who, like us, carries memories that never made it into words. Some stories only survive if they're heard with love. This morning the sun slipped through the window with an old kind of gentleness, almost like it was apologizing for being gone so long. It hits the faded curtain of room 18 just right, here in this nursing home in rural Ohio, and paints the same soft light that once crossed the tents on the island, back in those wartime days when everything felt urgent, and yet somehow frozen in silence. The white handkerchief rests folded on my lap. My hands hold it gently, the way only someone who's lost too much can. And sitting right on top is my box. It's small, dark wood, with a little crack on the left corner of the lid. I've kept it for 64 years, first under cots in the field, then in basements, inside suitcases, behind old wardrobes. Now, it lives under my bed, between the slippers I never wear, and the magazines I can't really see anymore. But every day before any nurse comes to call me for breakfast, I pull it out and place it on my lap. Like now, like always. Inside are the notes, more than 100, some folded in 4s, others rolled up like tiny scrolls, wrapped in gauze or yellowed tape. They smell like time, like dust, like dried blood and old sweat. But above all, they smell like absence, like letters that never made it. Either because they weren't allowed, or because someone didn't want them to. They say it's madness to keep what was never mine for so long. But what if no one else had kept it? What if I was the last witness to so many whispers? The last voice to hear their full names? The last hand they held before they slipped away? Me. Just an ordinary woman. One of many women in the war. One of many nurse stories that never made it out of paper records, smudged by military censors. Some folks say I should have burned them all. That keeping these scribbled notes, many written in a fevered daze with broken pencils and fading breath, was a violation of military protocol. But I ask, what's more sacred? The protocol, or a man's last request before dying? I remember the first note like it was yesterday. A boy, maybe 19, 20 tops, reached out with a shaking hand, said his name was Alan or maybe Alec. I can't remember anymore. He asked me to write to Mama and tell her the backyard garden was prettier than he remembered. Those were his exact words. Then he coughed. Then, nothing. I tucked the note into the pocket of my apron, close to my heart. From that day on, I started folding every new request like I was folding up part of my own heart. I'd hide them in my apron, my scarf, my shoes, anywhere I could. Later, when I couldn't fit anymore, I made the box. I used a morphine crate, small nails, and carved a cross with a pocket knife. On the lid, I etched something no one ever saw. If found, read with your heart. I never had the courage to show it to anyone. The days here are always the same. Oatmeal for breakfast, TV on low, bingo on Thursdays. The other ladies talk about grandkids, recipes, and medications. I smile, nod politely, but my mind's not here. It's there, in the muffled screams, the clinking of tools, the sting of ether, the sound of boots crunching gravel, and the voices. Oh, the voices. They still visit me when the room is dark and I forget to take my sleeping pills. Nurse, my name's Luther. Please write this to my wife. Her name's Ruth. Miss, tell my brother I forgive him. It wasn't his fault. Ma'am, I used to be scared of dying, but now I'm more scared of forgetting my daughter's face. Those requests, they don't die. They don't disappear. They live inside the box. When the war ended, they handed out medals. But no one handed out ears. No one cared what the nurses had to say. We were reduced to numbers, medical records, footnotes, in headlines. No one asked what we carried. No one cared what tore through us. The forgotten heroes aren't just buried in cemeteries. They're in the unread papers, the unspoken names, the promises left behind. That's why I'm writing now. Not for vanity, not even for forgiveness, but for late justice, for all the women in the war who stayed silent to keep their hearts from breaking, and for all the men who whispered their last wishes to no one. Today, here, in room 18, with the box on my lap and the white handkerchief over my knees, I'm writing because I don't want to die silent. Some mornings are harder than others. When the nurse asks if I want tea or coffee, all I can think about is the field hospital, the canvas tent, the sound of rain tapping the thin roof, the flickering light of the lantern above the stretcher. How my fingers used to go numb from writing names on gauze. How each name was an entire life, a heartbreaking story that would never get a happy ending. Sometimes I think about sending everything out, making copies, publishing, telling the world. But what kind of world still cares about memories that smell like mildew and salt? Maybe you do. You, reading this right now. Maybe you found this by accident, like someone stumbling across an unmarked grave. Maybe you'll listen to me. And if you do, please listen with your heart, because this box in my lap, it's been a grave. It's been an altar. It's held tear-soaked notes, blood-scribbled hopes. And now, as my fingers touch that one note, folded in gauze, smelling like wet earth and childhood, something stirs in me. Michael. It all started with him. His note is here, folded in gauze, with the scent of wet soil and childhood. And now that my fingers have touched it again, I remember what he said, with that trembling voice and those distant eyes. That's where it all began. It was on the third day. I was still wearing the borrowed coat, sleeves rolled up, pockets stitched in a hurry with blue thread, the only kind we had in the ward. The island was hot, humid, and the sound of helicopters never stopped. Bougainville, South Pacific. The outpost still smelled of raw wood and fresh bodies. Michael arrived late in the afternoon. He was thin, dark hair stuck to his forehead. Blood trickled from the edges of the field sheet, and his eyes were half open, like he was already seeing something that wasn't there anymore. But still, even in that state, he spoke. Spoke like he was talking to a familiar ghost. My mom's in the garden. I know 'cause I can smell the lavender. He grabbed my arm with a strange kind of strength. Not muscle strength, the strength of someone who wasn't ready to let go. And he said, "Miss, can you write that down for her?" I didn't know what to do. No one had trained me for that. The ward was full, and Captain Shaw walked between the cots like an emotion inspector, and the order was clear. Nothing leaves the infirmary without a stamp. But he kept insisting. With the voice delirium turns into a child's song. She takes care of the garden in the morning. Always made lemonade when I got home from school. Tell me she's okay? That she's wearing the blue apron? I didn't answer. But my fingers reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was from a syringe kit wrapper. And there, with the pen I always kept clipped to my coat, I wrote, "Mom, the lavender still smells like home, and your lemonade too." I folded it carefully, but I didn't give it to anyone. I didn't have the courage, or the defiance. I kept it in my pocket, next to the white handkerchief I wore around my neck. The same one that now covers the box. Michael died that night. Before the fever took him for good, he whispered, "You write real nice. My mom will understand." But she never got it. No one did. Not her. Not the dozens that came after. I never learned Michael's last name. Not even where he was from. Back then, medical files arrived smudged, incomplete. Sometimes they didn't even list a real name. Just the number stamped on the helmet plate. The next morning, Captain Shaw found one of my notes on the treatment table. It wasn't Michael's, but it could have been. He gave me one of those lipless smiles, full of polite threat. "This is a hospital, not a confessional. Nurse Maddox, if you want to write letters, go back to the mainland." That sentence cut deeper than any battlefield wound. Go back. For what? To be forgotten among neighbors talking embroidery? To carry the weight of hearing last wishes no one else ever would? No. That was the day I realized my job there was something else. Not just to clean wounds, check fevers, administer morphine, but to keep. To become the keeper of final delusions, of soul fragments too big to fit in broken bodies. Michael taught me that. With his imagined lavender and invisible lemonade, sometimes I wonder, was it really a delusion, or a memory shaped like a prayer? Many soldiers right before passing would return to childhood, call for brothers already gone, for mothers who left them young. Sing hymns they couldn't remember when conscious. One of them, I remember clearly, recited entire lines of a poem I never found in any book. Light in the field, breeze on my face. I'm not alone. I'm not misplaced. It was like a veil lifting, a portal opening, and I was just there to listen, like the women in the Bible who stayed by the tomb while the apostles ran. The doctors called it terminal synaptic activity. I called it farewell. That third day, I became someone else. Something in me cracked, or maybe opened, like a wound that bleeds memory. At night, while gathering supplies, I found Michael's note in my coat pocket. It was damp, nearly torn, but still readable. I dried it between the pages of a military pamphlet. And then, for the first time, I opened the wooden box. It had no lid yet, still raw. I placed it inside, right in the center. Michael was the first. And that's why, today, as I run my fingers over that yellowed paper with his shaky handwriting, I still hear that soft voice, feel that sunburn on his face, that scent of lemonade and lavender. He was the beginning of my disobedience, and maybe of my redemption. It was with Michael that I learned the difference between following orders and honoring lives. And when they pulled the sheet over his face, something in me went silent too. But the note remained, and after him came others. So many others. It was always the same. Captain Shaw walked into the ward like he was crossing a minefield. Eyes hard, jaw clenched, voice dry like old paper. His boots made the wooden floor creak. He never yelled. He didn't have to. Every word he spoke carried the weight of some unspoken rule, a military past that seemed to have erased any trace of humanity. Nothing leaves the ward without a stamp. Nothing. That was the first thing I heard from him the day Michael died. And the last thing I heard before placing the note deep inside the box. But soldiers don't die by stamps. They die from longing. They die with names between their teeth, with eyes searching for faces that aren't there anymore. They die with sentences half-spoken, with memories scattered across the tent floor, like buttons torn from a uniform they'll never wear again. Knew that. I felt that. Every time a voice called me ma'am with desperate sweetness, every time a sweaty hand gripped mine, like trying to hold on to one last thread of ground. But Shaw didn't care. He looked at bodies like spreadsheets. Ins and outs. Lives turned into reports. Deaths filed away as numbers. Sometimes I'd see him writing while a young man was still breathing. That's what he called discipline. And that's why I started hiding the folded notes in my apron, close to my heart. Yes, I knew it was forbidden. I knew I could be discharged, demoted, humiliated. But what they would never understand is that it was my way of making a silent promise that someone would hear them someday, that those men wouldn't be carried off only by the warm Pacific breeze or the cold records of the army. A promise, even in silence. The notes started to pile up, first in the left pocket, then in the hastily sewn lining. When I needed more space, I cut the bottom of one boot and slipped a few in there. But most stayed near my chest, as if by keeping them close to my heart, I could keep them alive for just a few more seconds. Once a new nurse, Ruth I think, saw me folding a piece of gauze with a name written in pencil. "Do you write for them?" she whispered, like she was afraid of waking the dead. I hesitated, smiled, didn't answer. She looked away like she didn't want to know more, like knowing was too dangerous. Because it was. Because every saved note was a direct act of defiance. And defiance was everything. Order, silence, protocol. Those words echoed through the tent walls like the mantras of a cold religion, where obedience mattered more than compassion, and red tape was more sacred than a soul. But me, I bled inside every time I obeyed, so I started swallowing the orders. Not metaphorically. I mean it. When Shaw spoke, I'd hold my breath, bite the inside of my cheek, and imagine his words dropping into my stomach like lead, a bitter taste that stuck to my ribs and kept me awake at night. I swallowed a lot of orders during that war. I swallowed my tears, my questions, my own notes. I even swallowed my name, because there, I wasn't Eleanor. I wasn't a daughter, or a woman, or a voice. I was just Nurse Maddox. And maybe that was what hurt the most. On one of the longest shifts, I got a boy who couldn't have been older than 17. He'd lost his right leg, was in shock, spoke nonsense like he was home playing with his little brother. He asked me to write, "Mom, I'm sorry I didn't wash the dishes. I promise I'll do it when I get back." It was absurd, childish, heartbreaking. But I wrote it anyway, folded the paper, tucked it into my bra. And for 3 nights I dreamed of a sink full of water, of dishes crashing on the floor. On the 4th day, he died, and Shaw didn't even look at him. "Next." That's all he said. As if lives were drawers to open and shut without resistance. But not all drawers close. Some slip through the cracks. And that's why I wrote. That's why I still write. Even now, with trembling fingers, with blurry eyes, with the box on my knees and another box inside my chest, I still write, still keep, still swallow what they won't let me say. And maybe, just maybe, someone will read this one day with the same lump in their throat I had back in that ward, when I swallowed my last order and made space for the next note. And that's when, while holding back tears behind my coat, I found a yellow handkerchief on the floor beside the cot, stained, still warm. I picked it up, not knowing. It would dry much more than sweat and blood. It's still here, in the left pocket of my floral cotton dress, folded 3 times, nearly see-through from so much wear. The yellow handkerchief, my cloak and my shield. I found it by chance, on a heavy, humid afternoon, right after the boy with the amputated leg was taken away. It was lying near cot 12, stained with mud, blood, and salt, and warm. Like it was still breathing. It was made of thin fabric, with a poorly hand-stitched hem. Someone had rushed to embroider it, using a faded gold thread. No initials, no scent. Just the texture of something that had been gripped too many times by trembling hands. I took it with me. At first, I used it to wipe my face, then to cover the note I kept hidden inside my coat. But over time, it became something else. The handkerchief was what I held every time a delirious soldier begged me not to let his name be forgotten. It was what I gripped when someone trembled, with fear, not knowing they were dying. It dried sweat. It dried blood. But most of all, it dried tears that never fell, because there was no time. In war, we don't cry with our eyes. We cry with our bodies, with bent knees, with curved backs, with the silence between one suture and the next. And the handkerchief absorbed all of it. It was with me for almost 2 years, folded in the pocket of my apron during sleepless nights, tied around the strap of my stethoscope, left under the makeshift pillow of a sergeant who was rambling about. Christmas 1942. She gave me a red coat. I didn't like the color, but I said it looked nice just to see her smile. He said that while bleeding from the belly. I didn't write it all down, but I gripped the handkerchief so tightly my fingers turned red. And later, I wrote on the back of a military notice, "Tell her the red looked nice after all." And I folded it, and I kept it, and the handkerchief stayed with me. It became part of me, my emotional cane. When I couldn't speak, I held it. When I wanted to scream, I bit it. When I needed to look strong, I tied it to my wrist like someone hanging onto a pole in a storm. Back then, we didn't have many certainties, just codes. The nurses communicated through glances, elbow nudges, the click of a clamp on a metal tray. But when one of us saw the yellow handkerchief, we knew. We knew someone had just died, or was about to. Some started to avoid it. Others said it was bad luck. But I didn't believe in luck during war, only presence, and the handkerchief was always present. It was like it was a witness itself, like it absorbed not just the liquid from wounds, but the echo of whispered names, of broken promises, of notes written with shaking hands. One night on shift, a younger nurse, her name was Helen, I think, saw the handkerchief fall from my pocket while I was helping a wounded soldier. She picked it up and asked, "You still use this? Looks so old." And I answered without thinking, "Not old, heavy." She frowned like she didn't get it, but she didn't ask anything else. Maybe she felt the weight. Maybe she understood the silence. Because that's what the handkerchief had become, a symbol, a sacred object among so many cold and cutting instruments. A small scrap of cloth that, despite its size, absorbed more pain than all the basins of saline in the ward. Today it's here with me. It's lighter now. The yellow's almost ivory. Some stains remain like rust marks, but I can still feel the warmth it held when I picked it up from cot 12. And I can still remember the words that followed me through so many shifts. Nothing leaves the ward without a stamp. But the handkerchief? The handkerchief left, and with it, the names, the final breaths, the broken sentences, and the notes that were never signed. I have no medals, no children, no one left who calls me by the nickname they used in the ward, Little Light, because of the flashlight I always carried, even when there was electricity. But I have the handkerchief, and every time I fold it, I remember Luther, who asked me to write that his dog liked jazz. Timothy, who wondered if the neighbor still watered the plants. Harold, who whispered, "Don't turn the light off," before closing his eyes. I fold the handkerchief like someone praying, like someone burying, like someone writing without pen or paper, but with memory. And it's still here with me, still damp with remembrance, still warm. Today, as I press the handkerchief to my chest, I realize there are marks only it knows, and notes only it ever heard, folded, hidden, wrapped in gauze, like the ones I carried with me in the suitcase that never came back empty. The suitcase is at my feet. Thick weathered leather, hand-stitched handles, and a clasp that creaks every time I try to open it. It doesn't travel anymore, but it's still here. Still. Silent like a guard dog that never rested. I brought it from the evacuation base when the unit was disbanded. I refused the ship. It was too slow, too festive. Full of reunions I wouldn't have. I chose the cargo plane. No windows, no seats, no applause. Just boxes, bundles, dust, and silence. A place where no one would ask questions, where no one would notice that my luggage was crying on the inside. Inside the suitcase were 47 notes wrapped in gauze, some still damp. Others smelled of ether, morphine, and the island's red dirt. Most had no clear recipient, just names, or nicknames, or whispered requests between spasms. Tell him he was my best friend. Promise they won't forget me. Write to her that I wasn't afraid. I packed it all carefully, like I was wrapping glass, folded my stained coat and placed it on top, like covering a body with a sheet. Over that, the yellow handkerchief. Color faded, but memory intact. And that's how I returned. Not with trophies, not with medals, but with other people's pain. Sewn into the lining of the suitcase, landed at a secondary airbase. No, one was waiting. I walked among men returning with songs and women holding handmade signs. I passed mothers, children, sweethearts, hugs that weren't mine, promises that didn't belong to me, and only later did I realize no one saw me either. It was like I wasn't there, like the suitcase didn't exist, like the war that went through me had happened in another dimension, one where women didn't come back, only disappeared. Took a bus to my hometown. The driver called me ma'am without looking up. I sat in the back, hugged the suitcase like a frightened child, and when the girl next to me asked if I was a widow, I just nodded. There was no way to explain. I wasn't a widow. I was a carrier of griefs that didn't belong to me. For years, the suitcase stayed under my bed, then behind the wardrobe. Then inside the old chest my father used for his carpentry tools. Every time I moved, I took it with me. And every time I opened it, the smell of the field hospital returned. That mix of blood, smoke, and hope, dying slowly. I tried to return the notes, tried to find the families, wrote letters, called numbers that no longer worked, searched lists, yearbooks, old newspapers. In some cases, I found out the parents had already passed. In others, the siblings had moved abroad. In almost all, I found out no one wanted to remember. Better to leave it alone, they said. War stuff, they whispered. But how do you leave alone a name written with someone's final breath? How do you bury a piece of paper that asked, with a failing voice, to be read with love? I never had the heart to burn anything. Even when they called me nostalgic, hysterical, a woman stuck in the past. The suitcase never came back empty. Even now at 88, it's still full, not just of notes, but of breaths I stopped counting, of tears I never cried, of voices I still hear when the wind brushes the curtains. Sometimes I think that if someone opens this suitcase after I'm gone, they won't understand. They'll think it was obsession. They'll toss it out, like old scraps with no name. But each note is a tomb, and each strip of gauze, a gravestone. That's where the forgotten heroes rest, That's where my nurse's story is written, not in ink, but in blood, sweat, and silence. If I could, I would have returned everything. Would have told the families their sons were loved, that their words were heard, that someone in the middle of chaos held their hands and promised, even without permission, that they wouldn't be forgotten. But the years silenced me more than censorship ever could. Taught me that not every promise finds an echo, and that some sorrows age with us, sitting beside us, sipping tea like old friends. Today I looked at the suitcase like you look into a mirror. I saw wrinkles that aren't on my face, but in my memories. I saw scars that don't bleed, but still ache. And I realized that, even though it was never truly mine, this suitcase is my inheritance. What's left of everything I couldn't say. There are nights when I rest my feet on the suitcase like I'm trying to warm cold memories. And it's always in that silence that I hear voices. Not from outside, but from within. Like the notes are breathing. Like they're calling me by the name I almost forgot. The woman who still listens. At first, I thought it was just a phase, a war habit, a coping mechanism. Talking to pieces of paper. Reading notes out loud to no one. But over time, I realized it wasn't madness. It was survival. It was the only way I could keep being myself, even when the rest of the world had clearly moved on. In the first few years after I came back, I still believed it might be possible to fulfill the promise. Every time I opened the suitcase, I'd make a list. Names, dates, smudges on the paper, scattered memories. I sent letters. I tried making calls. I even went to a few houses in person, left envelopes in mailboxes, sometimes with no name. Just a note inside, folded, unsigned, as if the letter itself knew the way better than I did. But almost no one responded. Some addresses didn't exist anymore. Others had turned into parking lots, churches, convenience stores. And the few who did answer looked at me with pity or discomfort, like my presence was an inconvenient reminder of something they'd rather forget. "You still remember all that?" they asked, like it was ridiculous. Yes, I remembered. I remembered every trembling voice, every word caught between teeth, every request whispered between spasms and fever. When I stopped trying to find the families, I started talking to the notes, first in silence, then in whispers, and later in a full voice. I'd sit in my room, suitcase open on my lap, and read like someone giving a Sunday sermon in an empty church, one by one, name by name, as if I were introducing those souls to someone, as if God needed an updated list. I began to notice that with each reading, something inside me stood back up, a part the war hadn't destroyed, just put to sleep. The part that still believed words had weight, and that, if spoken truthfully, they could still beat with life long after time had passed. The voice no one else heard was mine, and at the same time, it was theirs, because every time I read a note out loud, I became a bridge, an echo, a makeshift altar. It turned into a ritual. I'd place the handkerchief on my lap, turn on the lamp, set a teacup beside me, untouched, just to pretend I had company. And I'd read, with pauses, with feeling, with tenderness. Some notes were just fragments. Tell her I didn't scream. Let my sister know it was beautiful. I felt peace at the end. Others were longer, messy, mixing memory and delirium. But all of them, without exception, asked for the same thing, to be heard. And that's what I did. While the world outside kept spinning, weddings, birthdays, football games, I read letters from the dead, with a voice no one else heard. In the neighborhood, they started calling me odd. Said I lived in the past, that I should join a book club or a support group. But no group could understand what it meant to hold a man's last sentence in your hands. No club would welcome blood-stained notes as reading material. So I kept going alone. Slowly, I began memorizing the letters. I didn't need to read them anymore. I just had to close my eyes and say the names. Timothy, Isaac, Harold, Luther. And when the names came, so did the faces. The smells. The little quirks no one else noticed. One of them whistled in his sleep. Another bit his nails even with bandaged fingers. One kept a photo of his grandma hidden in his boot. They weren't soldiers to me. They were scared boys trying to find their way home through sentences. And I was the road. But a road with no destination. Because after a while I realized I had no one left to send anything to. The years passed. The houses changed. The faces died. The families drifted. Newspapers stopped mentioning the war. And the history books reduced us to footnotes. So I started packing everything up again, folding the papers, wrapping them in gauze, closing the box, quieting the voice, like pieces of soul that didn't belong to me, but lived inside me. Nowadays, when the nurse walks in and asks if I'm talking to myself, I smile. Because I'm not. I never was. I talk to what's left. I speak to the living memory of a pain no one wanted to inherit. And this voice, the one you hear now, even if just in reading, even if in silence, is the same voice that whispered names in the dark, wrote messages with trembling hands, and recited promises no one else had the courage to keep. The voice no one else heard never went silent. It just learned how to whisper. And it was in that hush between words that I realized even my coats knew what I was hiding. Because every time I folded the collar, it was one more secret I tucked close to my heart. Coming back was harder than leaving. When I left, I still had a purpose, a role. Even if invisible, even if unofficial, I knew what I was there for. To write down what no one wanted to hear. To hold hands that shook more from fear than pain. To fold names into the pocket of my coat. But when I came back, all I had was silence. I returned to a street where people talked about church bake sales and sidewalk repairs, about butcher shop discounts, about the new Sunday school teacher. No one mentioned the war. No one asked what it was like. It was as if they expected me to have come back with clean hands. But my hands were still stained. I smiled, of course, served tea when people visited, gave short answers when they asked how my time away had been. Some women liked to say I had served in exotic hospitals, a comfortable euphemism. Like I had done a bit of sightseeing among the wounded. I started wearing the same wool coat every day. Olive green, high collar, no buttons. It was warm, heavy, and made me feel protected. Inside the left pocket, I stitched a slit. That's where I hid letters, notes, bits of cloth with names inked in pen. It was my portable hiding place, my wool confession booth. The neighbors said I was private, that I didn't enjoy company. Some even called me odd. I'd hear them from the window while watering the plants, eyes lowered, just like I did in the wards when someone died. It wasn't shyness, it was grief. But a grief with no place to live, because you don't mourn people who weren't yours. And no one cries for soldiers you didn't really know, but I knew them. I knew their names, their fears, their final words. I knew their feverish smiles, their blurred eyes, their fingers trembling like leaves before falling. I knew the sound a man makes when he realizes he's going to die alone, and I hid all of it in the pockets of my coat. At church gatherings, I sat in the back, crossed my arms to keep the warmth and memories close. No one noticed. No one got too close. The town called me a quiet patriot, but no one wanted the details. Once a woman asked me, "Did you ever see real blood?" I paused. She smiled, amused at her own boldness, and I simply said, "Yes, every day." She never spoke to me again. The coat became my armor. Every time I folded it, alone, after coming back from the market or church, I felt like I was folding myself. Like each crease was a reminder that I didn't belong among women trading recipes, but among echoes no one wanted to remember. Sometimes I'd open the slit in the pocket at night, like opening a reliquary. I'd touch the papers with the tips of my fingers, read small fragments aloud just to myself. If she's reading this, it means I didn't make it, but tell her I tried. I kept your letter in my uniform pocket. I could still smell it. Each phrase was a heartbeat inside the coat, each word a silent blaze, and the world didn't want to know. Coming back was hard because it forced me to live among people who thought the war had stayed in another country, another body, another reality. To them, the war ended with the morning paper. But for me, it stayed in the suitcase latch, in the coat pocket, in the silence of every time someone called me by name, without knowing who I really was. The first time I thought about burning the notes was because of a comment. An acquaintance told me, "You need to stop this, Eleanor. You're becoming a bitter woman." I stared at her for a long moment. Bitter. That word hurt more than any of Captain Shaw's orders, because back then at least I was still useful. There, on that flowered porch full of small talk, I was just inconvenient. So I went to the basement, grabbed a box of matches, opened the suitcase, picked out a few notes. But when I struck the match, the flame went out. It wasn't fear. It was love. It was guilt. It was grief settled like dust in an old church. So I folded the papers again, tucked them back into the coat, and went out for a walk. People saw me as a shadow passing through the square, said I had a faraway look, but they didn't know that. Inside, I was holding on to 100 names with the strength I had left. Today, that coat is still in the closet, faded, frayed, smelling of time and silence. But if you reach into the left pocket, you'll still find a note. And maybe it says something no one ever had the courage to hear. Because that's what still holds me up. The names. Even if no one calls them, I still hear them. And sometimes they call me back, like they're still waiting for me. I didn't need to write them down to remember. The names stayed with me. Not like files arranged by date or rank, but as living memories, painful, blurry at times, but never erased. They etched themselves into me in a way that neither time, nor silence, nor indifference could ever undo. Timothy, Harold, Isaac, Luther. I say them slowly, watching the light slip through the crack in the curtain. It looks like the same light that filtered through the white tents of the ward, making the dust from the bandages dance in the air, lighting the half-open eyes of those who wouldn't make it back. Timothy was the first to call me by name. "Miss Maddox, tell me if my mom knows." He had fair skin, freckles up to his neck, and a country drawl from somewhere in Kentucky. He didn't ask for a letter. He asked for comfort, for reassurance. I told him yes, that she knew. And he smiled with eyes still glazed with morphine. Timothy died that night, without a sound, and I wrote his name on a strip of bandage and kept it. It's still in the box. Slanted letters, smudged, but still there. Harold. Harold touched me in a different way. He sang. Even without a voice, even with failing lungs, he whispered bits of old songs. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." And I started singing with him softly, just so he could pretend he was still home. After he passed, I kept singing for weeks. Until one day, I realized my voice was gone, stuck, as if my body had gone into mourning with me. Isaac was different. He barely spoke, but his eyes did. That kind of look that speaks louder than words. When he finally opened his mouth, he said, "I was scared." And then, "But it passed." That was it. I scribbled those words on a piece of IV bag, plastic, because it was all I had at the time. They're still there today, inside an old X-ray envelope. Luther. Oh, Luther. I think he's the one who visits me most in my dreams. His head was shaved, his skin dark, and he had the widest smile I ever saw in a war zone. When everything hurt, he made jokes. When bullets flew, he told stories about fishing with his grandfather on the Mississippi. But what stayed with me most was his last request. "Tell my daughter she's still my little girl, even if I don't come back." He had a crumpled photo of her in his pocket. I kept the photo. It's faded now, but the little girl's eyes still shine like they're asking me something. Luther was buried in silence. No ceremony, no flower. But every time I fold the handkerchief, it feels like I'm keeping vigil for him all over again. These names, they're not just memories. They're presences, pieces of soul that still live here with me. They don't need a calendar or a cemetery, because they're alive inside me. Some days, when the room is quiet and the suitcase is open, I talk to them. I tell them what's happening out here. I read them parts of the newspaper. I show them the window. I know it sounds crazy, but who decides what's crazy when you've lived surrounded by delirium? The world gave me many names over the years. Nurse, spinster, patriot, odd, invisible. But the only names that matter to me are theirs. The ones who died asking me to hold on just a little longer. And I did. Not with strength, but with listening. Not with heroism, but with presence. Maybe that's why I still hear them. Even now. Even here in this nursing home, where the other women talk about bingo and great-grandkids. While they count stitches on a crochet hook, I count names. The same ones. Always. The ones I never forgot. And if I still have some time left, I want to write them all down on a single piece of paper. Big, wide, clean. So someone can read it after I'm gone. Not as a statistic, but as a prayer, because that's what they are now. A prayer that repeats every time memory returns. Timothy, Harold, Isaac, Luther, and so many others I might not name out loud, but my heart still knows by the rhythm of the pain. And maybe that's why I never had frequent visitors, because my room has always been full of names, of voices, of promises no one else wanted to carry, and of absences that never left me. They say Sundays are the loudest days here at the home. Doors swinging open, laughter in the hallways, kids running with poorly wrapped flowers. Some rooms fill up with the smell of cheap perfume and store-bought cake. There's even music playing through a few windows. In mine, the sound is different. The creaking of wood under my feet, the kettle whistling alone, the wind tapping the curtain with no one there to close it. I never got many visitors. At first, I thought it was just a matter of time. My nephews promised they'd stop by. Said they'd bring photos. One of them even called once to ask if I still remembered the family dog. I said I did. He laughed and said, "You live in the past, Auntie." Then hung up. He never called again. I don't blame them. How can you blame someone who never learned how to listen to silence? The truth is, maybe I chose this distance, or maybe it chose me. Ever since I came back from the war, I noticed absence settles like fine dust. You don't see it coming, but before you know it, you're covered in it. People told me I needed to move on, that time heals. But time doesn't heal what no one recognizes as a wound. And what I carried never bled on the outside, only inside me. When someone died in the ward, I wrote it down, folded it, saved it, and then I waited for someone to come claim that pain, someone to say, he was mine, but they almost never came. Coming back meant living that cycle in reverse. Me with the papers, the world in a rush, the suitcase full, the house empty. A few neighbors invited me to lunches, bazaars, church services. I went, brought a dish of something simple. But I never stayed to the end, because in the middle of the conversations about soap operas, baptisms, the new seamstress on the block, I'd hear something else. She lives in the past. And maybe it's true. But maybe I am the past, an extension of it, a leftover piece of those who didn't make it back, an echo refusing to disappear. There was a time I still set out an extra chair in the living room, hoping someone might come. Not necessarily family. Could be an old colleague, a nurse from the base, a mailman, a curious reporter, a lost grandchild, but no one ever came. So I stopped waiting. But inside me, the waiting never stopped. Some days I feel like the visits do come. They're just not visible. When I open the box, for example, I hear footsteps, the creak of boots, a whisper near my neck, a voice saying, "Thank you," without sound. It's strange to say it out loud, but there are nights when I dream of a hall filled with chairs, one for each name, all of them occupied, and I am in the center, reading the notes out loud like I'm finally being heard, like those voices are visiting me. From the other side, my room has never been empty. It's full of unspoken names, of phrases that stayed with me longer than any relative ever did, of memories that call to me louder than my own name. Once, the director here asked if I wanted to switch rooms, said this one was too dark, too tucked away. I smiled and said no. How could I explain that darkness doesn't scare me, that what truly frightens me is being forgotten? I never had children, never married, but I've held more last words than any mother or wife I've ever met. And maybe that's why the visits never came, because what I had left couldn't be spoken out loud in hallways that smell like fabric softener. What I had left lives in objects, in the suitcase, in the handkerchief, in the notes, and in the muffled footsteps that no one else hears. Just today, while making my bed, I found a paper under the mattress. It was old, stained, but still legible. Just 2 words: I'll return. I don't know whose it was. Maybe it slipped from the box. Maybe it had been read so many times it just wanted to breathe. But when I saw it, I realized they did return. They always returned. Not in flesh, but in memory. And maybe that's the kind of visit that keeps me going. And that's why, when I thought about burning it all, my hands trembled. Not from fear of fire, but from fear of extinguishing the only voices that still called me home. It was autumn. You could smell it in the dry scent of the leaves and hear it in the hollow sound of wind slipping through the poorly sealed windows. Outside, the branches scraped against each other like wounded soldiers trying to stand. Inside, everything was quiet, as always, but inside me, there was too much noise. That afternoon, I opened the suitcase with an intention I'd never had before. Not to read, not to organize, not to remember, but to end it. I grabbed a box of matches from the drawer, sat on the floor with my legs folded, and lined up the notes on the rug like someone arranging photographs before a funeral. Some were so fragile they barely held together at a touch. Others still carried the scent of medical gauze, of wet earth, of the salty sweat of someone who had been scared all the way to the end. My heart was beating slowly, not with calm, but with a kind of trance. I remember exactly how I trembled. My hands, my lips, my eyes. Everything wavering between resolve and desperation. I picked up one of the notes, the one from the boy who sang, "You are my sunshine," and stared at the words, blurred by water and time. If she's reading this, it means I didn't make it back. I brought it to the candle burning on the little table, but I didn't touch it to the flame. I just stood there, note in one hand, fire in the other, and a voice in between. A voiceless voice, louder than any evacuation siren. No. It wasn't Timothy's voice, or Luther's, or any of the names I'd kept. It was mine, from a place I had forgotten existed, a place that still wanted to remember, that still needed to remember. The tears came without warning, not the kind you cry from physical pain, but the other kind, the ones that burn from within, like old letters that catch fire on their own. I dropped to my knees, released the papers gently, and covered them with the handkerchief. The same one, always. Folded, yellowed, worn down like my own will to keep going. It wasn't fear of fire. It was love. It was guilt. It was grief, layered like old church dust, like memory forgotten in the attic of time, like a name carved into wood whose paint has faded, but not its weight. I sat there for hours, doing nothing, just listening, inside and out, the crackling of the candle, the whisper of the curtain, the creak of the still open suitcase, as if it had sighed in relief for being spared. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with the box beside me, like a child you can't leave alone. I stared at the ceiling, waiting for the words to forgive me. Yes, I asked for forgiveness, from the notes, from the dead, from the living who never knew, from myself, because for a moment, I had wanted to erase everything, and to me, that felt more cruel than the war itself. When morning came, I was still awake. I picked up each note again, read them in silence, folded them more carefully, and put them away, one by one, like someone stitching memory together with thread made of blood and patience. After that, I never tried to burn anything again. I learned that pain doesn't disappear. It transforms into words, into a box, into a handkerchief, into silence that deserves to be honored. And on that day, I realized something else. I was never just a nurse. I was a tomb. I was an altar. I was an echo. And this box that now rests on my frail legs is more than a wooden object. It's a reliquary, an extension of the souls who left, a shelter for what the world refused to hear. Proof that even without an address, some notes are still waiting to be read. Today, when I fold the handkerchief and look at the box, I realize it's no longer just mine. It's a grave, but also an altar. And maybe, by opening it now, I'm finally ready to offer those voices to the world that never wanted to listen. It's here, resting on my knees, just like it has so many times before. With the handkerchief on top like a veil, with the exact weight of everything that's never said out loud. My box, the box. I've thought 1,000 times about how to describe it to someone who's never seen it. It's simple, made of dark wood, no decoration. There's a crack on the side, a knife mark on the bottom, and 2 faint prints that look like fingers scorched by time. But what's inside can't be described, because this box is a tomb. I've kept more deaths in it than any silent cemetery. Not the bodies, but the final traces, the last wishes, the final attempts to exist beyond pain. Each note is a headstone without flowers. Each fold, a small grave, where I buried names, fears, promises. But it's also an altar, because inside it, faith still lives. Faith that someone, someday, will hear what was silenced. Faith that, even without a cross, without a hymn, without a formal prayer, those young men were laid to rest with love. In the touch of my hand, the grip of the handkerchief, the whisper of my own name when there was no one left to speak theirs. Sometimes I open the lid very slowly, like I'm waking an old friend. The smell hits me immediately. Not rot, not perfume. Memory. A mix of old paper, worn gauze, and time that never healed. I feel it in my eyes, in my throat, in my bones. Everything is in there. The note from the boy who wanted to apologize. For the dishes. The message from the man who begged me not to let his brother be hated. The broken sentence from the father who just wanted to hear his daughter say, "Daddy," one more time. No one heard, except me. And now, at 88, sitting in a room where the clock ticks slower and the sun enters like it's asking permission, I know this box was never just mine. It belongs to all who left this world afraid of being forgotten. To all who whispered to me like I was the only thing still alive between them and the end. They trusted me, not because I was special, but because I was there, fully present, knees on the ground, hands steady even when trembling, ears trained not by medicine, but by compassion. It's strange to think that my life fits inside a box, but maybe that's why it's so heavy, not in pounds, but in absence, and in love, yes, love. Because only someone who has loved another's pain could carry it for this long. Only someone who saw humanity in a wounded man's final words can understand why I never let it go. Today, as I look at it with shaky hands and eyes drier than I wish, I know I'm saying goodbye, not to the box, but to the silence. I'm letting you, whoever you are, read what's been locked away for so long, to smell the memories, to hear, deep in your chest, the muffled sound of voices still asking for comfort or mercy. And if you're listening now, listen with your heart, because the heart doesn't lie, the heart doesn't file away. The heart holds. This box is the one thing I asked them not to touch here at the home. Some think it holds photos. Others say it's vanity. There's even talk that I keep old money in it. I let them wonder. I prefer mystery over indifference. But now, I'm telling everything. Because I don't want to die silent. Because if I don't say this today, maybe no one will ever know. And that would mean they died twice. Once in the war, and once in forgetting. When the nurse comes to call me for dinner, I'll ask for just tea. I'll leave the box open on the bed, the handkerchief beside it. And if someone walks in by mistake, maybe they'll pause, maybe they'll look, maybe they'll stay long enough to read something. Maybe. But for now, it's all still with me. The notes, the names, the altar made of wood, built with pain and hope. If there is a God, and today I believe there is, he knows this box is not blasphemy. It's a hymn, a song of voices that history never wrote down, but that still echo in the body of an old nurse who never wanted glory or medals or forgiveness. Only memory. And if this is the last time I write, let it be known. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't revenge. It was care. And now, with the voice I have left, I ask only one thing. That someone keeps listening. Now everything is quiet. The box is closed but not locked. The handkerchief rests on top of it like it's covering a tired body. The suitcase stays in the corner of the room, still but pulsing. And me. I'm sitting at the edge of the bed, my coat folded beside me like a forgotten flag. Today I don't write out of anger, not out of fear. I write because I don't want to leave this world in silence. I don't want life to keep passing me by like someone walking across a field with no flowers, no headstones, no name. Because even though they made me believe my story was too small, to matter, I know there is life in whispers, and courage in the quiet of someone who held everything in for far too long. This confession is not revenge. It's not a protest. It's not a spectacle. It's just a gesture, a gentle warning that I existed, and that they existed too. The ones who never came home, the ones who looked me in the eye with a fear purer than childhood, the ones who died calling out names they never heard again. Timothy, Harold, Isaac, Luther, Michael, Ruth, Charles. I can't list them all anymore. But my body still recognizes each one like they were tattooed not on my skin, but in my memory. In the nights I stayed awake reading letters to no one. In the days I folded my coat like I was sealing a tomb. And now I ask only one thing. If you hear me, let it be with your heart. Don't look for logic or proof. Don't try to turn this into data or a resume. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't a martyr. I was a woman, a listener, an echo. At 88, I no longer wait for answers, but I still write. Still dream of voices saying, "Thank you," in empty hallways. Still feel the suitcase pressing at my feet like it's asking me not to leave it alone. Still clutch the handkerchief to my chest when the world outside forgets what once bled. The box will still be here when I'm not. Someone will find it, and maybe they'll throw it away. Or maybe they'll open it, and if they do, let them read. Not in a rush, not with pity, but with soul. Each note is a breath that outlasted the end. A memory that survived erasure. A candle lit in the deepest part of an emotional trench. The world forgot them, but I didn't. And maybe you, who made it all the way here. Maybe you won't either. Maybe right now, this very moment, something in your chest is beating a little differently. A borrowed memory. A grief that's not yours, but now lives with you. And if that happens, then my box fulfilled its purpose. Then my listening was worth it. Because the only justice left for those who died without return is not letting them die again in forgetting. Today the sunlight comes in a little, softer through the window, as if it knows. As if it understands the weight of light on a story that lived so long in darkness. My body isn't the same anymore, but my voice, even trembling, still remembers how to say names, still folds paper with reverence, still knows there's something sacred in the act of keeping. And if I say goodbye now, let it be gently. Like someone lying down knowing they left the door cracked just enough for someone to come in and listen with the heart. If these are my final words, let them be a soft whisper. They existed. I heard them. I loved them. And now I rest, now that I've told it all. The silence inside feels lighter. Time is a slow tailor, you know. It doesn't erase scars. It stitches them, in ways only visible when the afternoon light hits just right. I waited so long to say these words. And now that I have, it feels like I can breathe again. These days I sit by the window. I sip my tea slowly, write little phrases in an old notebook, and talk to the birds like they're late visitors. I'm not in a hurry, and I'm not afraid. I just want these voices I carried to finally find a place to be heard. Thank you for listening this far. You were, without knowing, the altar where I placed everything I've kept for over half a century. Listening was a kind of blessing. If this touched your heart, if any part of this story lives now in you, or in someone you love, then subscribe to the channel so we can keep walking together. Like this video if it felt like it held you, and share it with someone else who carries stories that never fit in this world. Sometimes, all we need is someone to say, "I hear you." And today, you were that person for me.